Absolutely. Absolutely. First, I want to thank everyone for allowing me this platform this evening to speak to you, the Charlotte Post, of course, you, Mr. White, and you, Mr. Johnson, as well. I come to you today in the spirit of the late Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley and the legacy of her son, Emmett Lewis Till, for I believe, if not for the Emmett Till murder case, there would be no Keith Beauchamp filmmaker today. And without those who lost their lives in the civil rights struggle, we will have no path to follow. So I want to thank you all for allowing this opportunity for me to speak. And for those who probably don't know about the Emmett Till case, I think is the best time to really give a small synopsis that I normally do all the time before I actually go into detail about the case. The year was 1955. The day was August 28th. The place was the Delta of Money, Mississippi, a case that has shocked and haunted a nation for more than 6 decades, a case that is still unresolved, the untold story, the murder of Emmett Lewis Till, a child who begged his mother, the late Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley, to let him go down to the Deep South to visit relatives, a vacation that would not only be remembered by his family, but now the whole world. Little did Mrs. Mobley think in a week's time, her son, Emmett, her only child, would be abducted from his great uncle's home and tortured for one of the oldest taboos of the South, addressing a white woman in public. 2 men were soon arrested, Roy Bryan and J.W. Mallow, but they were later acquitted in the court of law by an all-white, all-male jury. Of course, 4 months after this dreadful crime, Roy Bryan and J.W. Mallow would confess to the murder of Emmett Lewis Till to a reporter by the name of William Bradford Huey, who would then publish their story in Look magazine. This case sent shockwaves at the time, sent shockwaves around the globe, and many felt that would cause a change that we're still currently fighting for. By now, you're asking yourself why. Why is this case so important right now in this point in time, where terrorism hits all of us who are watching today? For hundreds of years, our ancestors have been terrorized, and this act of terrorism existed far before September 11th, and unfortunately will continue on. This case is important because it's important. We must never forget those who paved the way for us to exist in this free society. It's important, like Reverend Jesse Jackson would even say, with no sense of history, we only exist in a vacuum. How can you respect boxer Mike Tyson without understanding Joe Louis? How can you respect gospel singer Yolanda Adams without knowing that she stands on the shoulders of people like Mahalia Jackson? You see, it's important that we know the truth surrounding Emmett Till's murder. For if we forget our past, history will repeat itself. Why is it that we still live in a world where dragging a man to death like a James Byrd is not good enough, that you would want to desecrate his grave just to prove a point? Why do we still live in a country where strange fruit continues to hang from the trees of Magnolia abroad? You see, it's important that we know the truth surrounding Emmett Till's murder, but not only Emmett Till's murder, but many other murders that have proven to be quite colossal to American history, and they're being made a part of his story today. Now, Mr. Johnson, I can ask you a question. My journey with Emmett Till started when I was just 10 years old. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I was in my parents' study, and I was going through old vintage magazines that they kept over the years. And as I pulled out a magazine, it was an old Jet magazine that I pulled out that had the story of Emmett Till in it. On one side of the page, there's this horrific, this angelic face of this young boy, 14-year-old boy, sort of a mirror image of myself at that time. And then on the other side of this page, it was this horrific face of this monster. And I couldn't really wrap my head around what I was actually looking at. But my parents just so happened, they were walking past the study. My mother looked in on me, and she saw me with this magazine with my mouth open. And I recall her walking in, and she comes over and looked over my shoulder and discovers what I was looking at. Then she looks at my father, and she had this strange look upon her face towards him. He comes in, And he looks over my shoulder, and then they both looked at each other and said, it's time to tell them the story. But throughout my life, the name Emmett Till kept resurfacing. When I got into high school, I was interracially dating. And the first thing my parents would tell me before I left the house at night was, don't let what happened to Emmett Till happen to you. So it became an educational tool to teach me about the racism that still exists in this country today. But it wasn't until 2 weeks before my high school graduation where I feel I had my major run-in with racism. And that was when I was actually assaulted by an undercover police officer for dancing with the white classmate of mine. And that's what spurred me in wanting to fight injustice. But I felt the only way that could be possible if I became a part of that system. So I began to study criminal justice at Southern University of Baton Rouge in hopes of becoming a civil rights attorney. But then my junior year of college, I decided to sit out and visit childhood friends who started their own film production company here in New York City. And of course, that's how my journey began.
Okay. Herb, you can jump right in there. I got several more. Go ahead.
Of course you do. But welcome, Keith. And your story is a powerful one. Maybe not quite as powerful as Emmett Till's, but I think we can all accept that in one form or another. But the question is, when you talk about the taboos of a nation or of a society, and jumping back to 1955 in your research, what kind of give us the lay of the land in Mississippi and what Mississippi 1955 was like, and maybe even compare it to parts of America today, because I know there
Absolutely.
are regional differences, and there are people who think stereotypically like the South is this, or the Northeast, New York City, where you are, is like that. The West Coast is like that. Kind of give us the lay of the land from 1955 Mississippi.
I'm glad you asked that question, Mr. White, because it's very important while we're having this discussion that we understand Emmett's story and and put in the proper context of history. So I could go a little bit further, a year further than 1955, because it's important that we must mention 1954, when we had the Brown versus Board of Education decision won by the NAACP, which basically stopped segregation, was supposed to stop segregation in public schools, right? So you have Brown versus Board of Education that takes place, a big landmark decision that was won by the NAACP. And out of this win comes the formation of the White Citizens Council of Mississippi. Now, the Citizens Council was an organization that was against integration, and they vowed to, because of this decision, they vowed to bring a reign of terror throughout the state of Mississippi, as well, throughout the South as well. So in 1955, it was a turbulent year. The first victim that befell the White Citizens Council was Reverend George W. Lee out of Belzoni, Mississippi. He was an NAACP leader. He was also a member of the Regional Council on Negro Leadership. He was registering Black voters. He was also, and I'd be remiss and not mention that he was also the first Black voter in Humphreys County, registered Black voter. So in 1955, he would be assassinated because of his civil rights work and his fight, his voters registration for African Americans. He is shot while on his way home from a speaking engagement. Then this actually takes place on May 7th, 1955. 2 weeks before Emmett Till's arrival, you also had the murder of another civil rights leader, and that was Lamar Ditley Smith out of Brookhaven, Mississippi. This actually happened on August 13th, 1955. Lamar Smith was a World War I vet. He was a huge civil rights leader in his community. He was known for his activism and registering Black voters. And unfortunately, on this day, on August 13th, He was shot on the courthouse lawn in broad daylight in front of about 100 people, many would say, and no one was ever brought to justice. Not only with Reverend George Lee, Lamar Ditley Smith case, as well as Reverend George W. Lee. I say these, I call these two names out because they're very important to understand. Both men understood the danger they would be in, but they also understood the importance that Black people exercise their constitutional right to vote. And so when we hear and we talk about those who had struggled, who had lost their lives in order for us to vote, these are the two people that you should be thinking of. Now, this is the atmosphere in which Emmett Till walks into. And of course, on that fateful day of the wolf whistle, it cost him his life. But it also made Emmett instantly a poster child to the anti-lynching movement, because the next big thing that the NAACP was fighting for was to get anti-lynching legislature passed. Now, you hear this word, this term, anti-lynching legislature. We've been talking a lot about that in recent years because we have senators, members of Senate, or should I just audibly say Congress, that has been fighting to get this legislature passed. And so Emmett instantly becomes the poster child to the anti-lynching movement. And of course, when you think of that, his position, and you think of the courageousness of his mother, Mother Mobley, having an open casket for the world to see what happened to her son, this was actually woke the sleeping giant of Black people across the globe and mobilized the American Civil Rights Movement.
Okay, and so, in our previous discussions, and you and I, we talked about it. There's going to be the cynic that gets out, and they will say, you know what? This is 1955 America. We've come such a long way as a country. Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act, and all the other stuff that's come on. Why take the Wayback Machine to 1955 when so much has been done? And yes, there's all this other stuff that's going on, but why 1955? Why not 2022?
Yes. Well, it's an interesting thing here. I consider myself being still young. I'm 50 years old. Like I started doing this research on the Emmett Till case when I was 22 years old. So over half of my life, I've been learning not only about the history surrounding Emmett Till's murder, but many other murders, civil rights murders of that time. And I can, being a student of history, I can actually see, how things are coming, are moving ahead, and how some things are not. Clearly, with what we've been through in the past few years, it has shown us that we have gone backwards in certain ways. Now, I like to say all the time, things have cosmetically changed, but the fight for freedom and justice in this country and truth remains the same. It's the same identical struggle. What we're dealing with now, presently today, is what we were dealing with back in 1955. And there's no other story that speaks to that time than the story of Emmett Till, because if you look at the surrounding backdrop on how the Emmett Till case actually transpired, then you would see what's happening today has happened before. And so, even with, and I talked about what we've been through in the last few years, but even so, one of the biggest names that came out of the last few years was, of course, the George Floyd case. And there have been many others. And you hear this comparison all the time around it, because I have to say, it's very important for us to establish and understand that what befell Emmett in 1955 are the same things that are causing the problems that we're seeing on the streets when we see Black and brown people slaughtered on the streets of America, not only by law enforcement, but white supremacists today. And this is why Emmett's name, every time you hear these names, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, all these other names. The reason why Emmett's name continues to come up because there's no justice for Emmett, and that's, he symbolizes, our past and deeply in many ways, the injustice as well as the change that we're looking for.
But spend a minute talking about that. Senator Schumer actually activated the Justice Department to look into this case and
Yes.
what kind of justice could be brought about. And then it got to the Justice Department and it started on a track that seemingly people thought would have some results. What happened?
Yeah, that's a good question. So coming out of my investigation into the case in 2004, when the case was reopened, of course, it was my documentary that sparked the reopening of the case. And what I discovered there were more people involved with the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till than the two known assailants that everyone been speaking about for years. I actually discovered it was up to 14 people involved with the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till. 5 of these people were Black men. We believe they were forced to participate in the crime. So during the reopening of the case in 2004, which lasted until 2006, when the case went to, in 2007, when the case went to the grand jury, it was discovered there were 2 main people that we should really hone in on. And these 2 people were, one, Henry Lee Loggins, one of the Black men who we believe were forced to participate in the crime, as well as Carolyn Bryant Dunham, the white woman who was at the center of the case and who was the one that Emmett Till whistled at. And because of this, that was basically prompted the case to be reopened in 2004. So when the case went to a grand jury of Carolyn's peers, right? They decided to pass a no true bill. And so, the system failed us, in 2007, although we were able to get the case reopened in 2004. And so it was quite frustrating, to say the least, because we all thought, even including the federal government, thought that we would see an indictment, and we didn't.
Is there, even though there wasn't an indictment, either on the federal level or the state level at this point, is there anything that you can point to in this investigation, or even from the production of your documentary, that you can identify and say, you know what, that's a win, no matter how small that is? Is there anything that you can hang your hat on and you say, we got that instead of nothing at all?
Yes. Well, I think the greatest thing, Mr. White, that I should say, the greatest thing about creating this documentary was just having the moment that I shared. I would say the moment, but the many times that I shared with Mother Mobley. She was my inspiration to pursue this case because she had fought for 47 years until her last breath to get justice for her son. So along the way, as I was producing this film, which took 9 years for me to produce, she was learning about what actually happened to her son. Even in, a lot of the interviews that I conducted in the Untold Story of Emmett Till, she was present. So I would like to say that was the win for me, being able to provide a platform, one, for the witnesses to speak, and also for Mother Mobley to continue to learn what transpired in 1955 so she can have a clear understanding what happened to her son and why he was murdered. And so she actually foresaw the case being reopened before I even believed it would even happen. I mean, she literally told me that I would be the one to get her son's case reopened. And as I brought her more evidence, she got more excited about it. And I guess she, felt strongly at that point that it was going to happen. And so, our dream was answered on May 10th, 2004. Unfortunately, it was just 1 year after her passing, but she did see and understood all the evidence that I had on the case.
And that's really interesting. And let's talk a little bit more about Mrs. Mobley. when you first met her, kind of give us an idea of what kind of person she was. What was her state of mind in terms of finding justice for her son, and how you and she bonded over the production of the documentary?
Absolutely. Well, it's a little story. Coming to New York City, every filmmaker who's just starting off or thinking they're going to be a part of entertainment have to have a side job. And that was me. I was working at Estee Lauder headquarters in New York City, something totally I could never imagine me doing. But it was after a meeting when I was asked if there was a story that I wanted to tell. I said it would be in an Emmett Till, a story that I heard most of my life. But I knew before I even took on this task, I needed support, family support. I didn't even know that Mother Mobley was still alive at that time. I just started doing research on the internet, and I discovered that she was still alive and she was still fighting for justice for her son. She had a website. I contacted the webmaster, and after talking to the webmaster, he encouraged me to call Mother Mobley. So I'm sitting at Estee Lauder. I'm sitting there conjuring up this courage to call her because, as you said, I didn't know. We don't know what kind of frame of mind she was in. I could never imagine. And here I am, a young filmmaker, a young guy who's going to reach out to someone I consider to be the mother of the civil rights movement, this iconic woman. And I was just nervous about it because I didn't know if she was going to have a bad day or what. But anyway, I picked up the phone and I called her, and she picked up, and I quickly hung up in her face. Again, I was scared. I was a young kid. I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen, what she was going to do. I didn't know what type of frame of mind she was in. I didn't want to open up old wounds. And after I hung up, I beat up myself at the office, trying to figure out why would I do something like this. I'm like, I got to call her back. And then I conjured up the energy and the courage to do it again. So as soon as I called her back, she picked up the phone, and I quickly apologized to her for hanging up in her face. And I told her I was very nervous, and that's why I hung up. And she told me, baby, just relax and just talk to me. So I opened up and I told her the story of how I was introduced to Emmett Till and how much Emmett has been a part of my life. And I think she was taken by that because we ended up talking for 2 hours that day. And after that point, that was early 95. We were talking on the phone. And then in 96, I actually met her face to face 2 weeks before Christmas. I went to her home in Chicago. And, I've heard her say this on interviews before. She says it was like a love affair for us. I mean, a real life love affair. Our eyes met, and we just became close from that point forward. And I know it had a lot to do with me on my end because I lost my grandmother at the time, and I was looking for that void. And I think in some strange way, she was looking for young people, which she always had, to help fill the void of losing her son. And we actually worked together for 8.5 years until she unfortunately passed away. But every day, Mr. White, she was very adamant about fighting for justice for her son. She wanted to see justice done, and those who were involved, she wanted to see them held accountable. And so when I say she fought until her last breath, it was an hour before her passing that I was on the phone with my colleague, Albert Sykes of the Emmett Till Justice Campaign, and we were talking to state officials in Mississippi about how we're going to go about handing over evidence to them in regards to the case. And then 1 hour later, she passed away. And so, this has been an ongoing effort for myself and also family members of Till to make sure that justice is that I gave to her, that I would do everything in my power, to make sure that is done as well.
So where does all that stand? And we were talking about something happened in 1955. The fight still is going on. It's had its ups and its downs. But right now, in terms of how you see this, where does all this stand, and how is it going to move forward or continue to move forward?
Well, you're talking about particularly the Emmett Till case, where it stands at this moment. Well, okay, well, I'm sure a lot of your viewers have watched over the years things being conjured up about the Emmett Till case, because in 2017, the case was reactivated because of a book that was written by Dr. Tim Tyson out of Duke University, The Blood of Emmett Till, which boasted that Carolyn Bryant Dunham actually confessed to him about her participation in the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till. Unfortunately, in December of 2022, the federal government made their announcement that they were closing the case from their end because they didn't see legitimate evidence that Dr. Tyson's claims were actually true. And so, out of that, I'm gonna have to say it was a real frustration to hear that, because of the fact that, it was 2017 when the case was reactivated because of this so-called confession. And it took them all the way to 2022 to give us an answer that we already knew, to be honest with, that was a lie. And so it was never really, Tyson never was really the focus from our point of view. Our focus was if they were going to go after the last remaining participant in the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till. And still, we don't have any answers for that. And so we're going to keep on, Mr. Johnson, fighting to make sure that happens. Although the federal government has since closed the case has always been in the jurisdiction of the state, because there's no statute of limitations on murder and kidnapping in the state of Mississippi. So do we have an opportunity to actually see justice done? Yes, but it's going to have to take a courageous DA to make that decision to move forward.
And it has to be somebody from Mississippi.
Well, I would wish that it wouldn't be someone from Mississippi. I hate to say that, but to Mississippi's credit, they have been the leading state in prosecuting these old cases. So I have to tip my hats off to them for that. But this particular case is different. This was a case that sparked the American Civil Rights Movement, which is why I believe that the Emmett Till case wasn't really truly taught in the school systems. It was because of Till that Rosa Parks decided not to get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It's because of Till that Dr. Martin Luther King, who was 26 years old at the time, decided to take on the Montgomery bus boycott, because he felt that the murder of Emmett Lewis Till was an intimidation factor to keep Black people away from the polls. 1955 in Mississippi was an election year. So there's many factors why I believe, the case of Emmett Till was not properly taught in school, and you can't deny it, at this, the reasons why. But we also know that prosecuting this case is going to be extremely controversial, because even in 2006, 2007, when the case went to the grand jury, we had two people we were looking at. That was Henry Lee Loggins, the Black man who was holding Emmett Till down, and Carolyn Bryant Dunham, the white woman Emmett Till Wilson. If we would have indicted Henry Lee Loggins for the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till, then we would have had a major backlash from the Black community. If we would have indicted Carolyn Bryant, I know that was extremely controversial, and still controversial now, because she would be the first white woman ever indicted for a civil rights murder. And we all know, it's no secret, we all know what the white woman stands for in terms of white supremacy in the South. And so we believe, myself and the family, believe that Carolyn Bryant Dunham has been protected over the years. We're talking about white womanhood that's being protected here. And so the question is, do we have the courage, or is the country ready for indicting someone, prepared to indict someone of this nature? She's up in age now. She's in her late 80s. And she's a white woman. And I know people like to make her out to be someone that's innocent or a victim of the times per se. But I can honestly tell you that she was a 21-year-old murderer. And people have to remember that.
But even Loggins claims that he was never a part of this, and so I'm trying to figure out how do you prove that he was, and then as more and more people are getting older and older and passing on, this becomes an even more complicated case to get
Well,
justice.
well, Loggins, rest in peace. He passed away a number of years ago, and it was pretty known during the investigation his involvement. That came out very clear. Of course, he didn't say that in the 60 Minutes piece or the interview that I did with him in my documentary, The Untold Story of Emmett Till. But he spoke to her son, and there's a lot of evidence, an eyewitness accounts that put him on the back of the truck holding Emmett Till down. So we know that to be fact. But he's passed away now, and the only remaining person, accomplice to the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till is Carolyn Bryant Dunham. And I'm gonna say this, that I know of, because Carolyn Bryant Dunham, she holds all the information that could, has, changed the story completely. If you want to believe her, by the way, just put it that way.
In your experience as a filmmaker, putting together the documentary, walk us through that process. What was that like? Were there people that you talked to who were willing to talk? Were there people who weren't so willing to talk that you had to go sleuth it out and grab them in unusual places and get them to talk? Yes. How did that all work out? I mean, because and I've talked to Ken Burns. I asked him about the similarity between journalism and filmmaking, as documentary filmmaking, and he said they're absolutely intertwined. You have to be an investigator to pull these types of documentaries off. What was your experience like?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Mr. White, because you were talking to a veteran, Ken Burns, right? You're speaking of a veteran in the industry who was taught the craft of filmmaking, especially documentary filmmaking. At the time I was young. I was this novice filmmaker. I wasn't too hip in understanding the ins and outs of filmmaking. I knew that when I went into the Delta for the first time, that when I saw the fear, when I mentioned the name Emmett Till, it was going to take some time for people to actually open up to me and for me to find witnesses in the case. And so, when I first went to the Delta and I mentioned the name Emmett, nobody would talk to me, because it was told to many of them not to utter the word in public. So people would shun you quickly. I don't care if you're the same skin color tone or not. They would not talk about Emmett. And this is the early 90s. And if you went to the Delta of Mississippi in the early 90s in Money, Mississippi, time stood still. We're talking about the 50s. And so I stuck out like a sore thumb. But when I kept being persistent, and I would ask people questions about Till, and every now and then they would give me a little bits and pieces of the story. But I would have to say Mother Mobley was very good with staying in touch with people over the years who were connected to the case. And also, remember, there was a number of Emmett Till's relatives who was present on the day of the Wolf Whistle, as well as the night of the abduction, who had never really spoke publicly about it since the 50s. And so one of those people was Emmett's cousin, Simeon Wright, who shared the bed with him on the night of the abduction. And it took me 3 years to convince him to talk to me. Mother Mobley had never heard him speak, because he did not want to speak after he had an interview like probably 25 years after the murder of Till. And he watched how the media twisted the story and blamed the family the Wrights family, his great uncle, his father, which is Emmett's great uncle, Moses Wright, they blamed the cousins for the murder of Emmett Till. You probably heard that the story that Emmett Till was dared to go into the store. And this was just something that was created by a relative who was not actually there, who put this lie out on the documentary Eyes on the Prize. And this lie has been the truth for a long period of time. And Curtis Jones was his name, the cousin of Till, who made this statement, who wasn't at the house that night, who wasn't there during the abduction. He was there during the abduction, but wasn't at the store when the wolf whistle took place. And he made this statement, and that was the lie that has traveled over the years. He recanted his story in the early 80s, just before he passed away to the family. And so for many years, the family of Till, members of the right side of the family, who's also relative to Till, of course, have stood quiet because they felt that the media was going
Mm-mm. Okay, yeah.
to get him to open up to me.
There we go.
And so 3 years of struggle, he opens up to me, and he becomes the missing link, I would say, in getting the truth surrounding Emmett Till, because after he opened up to me, he introduced me to many of the people who were still living, who was at the store the day of the wolf whistle, and who was part, there the night of the abduction as well. So even then, getting those names and getting those contacts took me a long time for these people to open up to me. So a lot of the 9 years of creating the untold story of Emmett Till, the reason why it took so long was because I had to throw the filmmaker's hat aside and become friends with these witnesses and get them to trust me enough to tell me their stories, and then in turn allow me to tell their stories to the world. And so it was an ongoing struggle, some turbulent years, because it was, I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew when I was meeting these witnesses in the Delta and around the country, I knew I had to have them taped. So it wasn't really clear that I was going to develop a documentary yet, because in my mind, I was going to produce a movie. So I would do these interviews and capture these interviews to go home to develop a script. So I was writing the script at the same time. My script ended up being optioned off by producers who work with Showtime, and they sat on the project. And so they had a 2-year option agreement with the right to renew it. So I lost total control of the film. And so Mother Mobley said to me, Keith, you coming across this evidence quickly. We need to get it out to the masses. Why don't you consider producing a documentary? And we'll use that as a stepping stone to get the case reopened. And if you're lucky, then things will come back around and you can do the feature film. And I was like, yes. And it worked in our favor. So
Yeah, smart woman she was.
she was very savvy, Mr. White. She told me I needed to use the same tools that she used in 1955 to get the world's attention on Till. And the best thing for me, I lived in New York. The first thing she said to me, I needed to get the media on my side. I'm in New York City, the media capital of the world. This is the best place to be. If I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or somewhere else throughout the South or anywhere in this country, I don't think I would have had this machine behind me. So I got the media behind me. She said, make sure you had the evidence. I had the evidence, but she said, with the evidence, I need the people, because the evidence won't stand by itself. We need public outcry. What I did was I started touring with a 30-minute trailer about Till, and I would tour and I'll speak about Till at universities and colleges around the country. Everywhere I had an opportunity to speak of Till, to get the support, to garner the support, I would do. And it eventually worked in our favor. Same tools. She was the mastermind behind getting this case reopened. She knew and she understood exactly what must be done. I followed her lead and it worked.
Let's get a couple of questions in from the audience that are coming in here. And the first one is from Lynn Reed. And she asked, how or where could I watch the documentary?
Good question. The documentary, I posted on YouTube. That's a little secret that a lot of people don't know. It's on YouTube, The Untold Story of Emmett Lewis Till. I posted it there because the Emmett Till Mobley Foundation actually wanted to post it on their page. So it's there for everyone to see. It's not my film to control, it's for the world to see it. We're also re-releasing the film, and it's going to probably stream. It's streamed everywhere, but we're going to re-release the film at some point soon because we have an upcoming feature film that I finally produced on the Emmett Till case, which will be out October 7th of this year.
Okay, and we have Anise Carr. She says, I've always felt that the case of Emmett Till should be told to young people so that they can truly understand the hurt that we as a collective of Black people carry, even today's society. Emmett was a young man who just looked at a white woman.
Yes, and that's why it's so important, because we all can identify as being 14 years old. And I've gone to, I mentioned I've gone to colleges and universities. I was just at the FBI Academy yesterday teaching Till. But young people, I teach Till as well. I've been in middle schools, elementary schools, and different institutions teaching Till to young people. And it's just such a powerful story because we all can relate to being this 14-year-old kid. And that's why I think it resonates and reach a lot of people more, because there was a time of innocence. We all have felt that innocence. We've all felt invincible. And we've all done things that ended up coming back to haunt us. And that was, unfortunately, the case of Emmett Till.
And we have Jason Wooten who asked, great work. Do you have any sense of if any of these murders in the South during that era were successfully solved and prosecuted?
Well, I mean, of course, you have a few that had been prosecuted, successfully solved and prosecuted. I think one of the known ones that everybody will recall is the 3 civil rights workers case, where you had the prosecution of Edgar Ray killing in 2005. You also had the prosecution of James Hill. I believe that was in 2006, and that was the murder of Moore and Dee's case out of Mississippi as well. They said they were core members, but they were not core members who were killed. And he was the 2 bodies that was discovered when they were looking for the 3 civil rights workers. And so you had that prosecution. You also had a few others, more than a few others, the prosecution. Jimmy Lee Jackson out of Alabama, you had a prosecution in that case. White Affair, I can't remember all of them. Reverend White's case that took place in, I can't remember exactly, but there's quite a few of these cases that have gone and been reviewed and brought back to the court of law, and we've seen prosecutions. But, again, we're talking about the early 2000s, and so we're racing against time now to solve all the others. The most fortunate thing, working on the Emmett Till case, it showed me how filmmaking could be an activism tool, and that's my tool. And because of my work with Till, I was brought in to assist the FBI and Justice Department on other civil rights code cases. And because of the reopening case, the Civil Rights Cold Case Initiative was started. and I became a part of that. So when they had problems getting people to open up about cases, they would call on me. And in return for that favor of working with them, they allowed me to produce television series on these cases. And so Emmett Till was my first baby. That was the first case I worked on. Then I developed a show called Murder in Black and White, which was shown and aired on TV One networks in 2007. 2008, I had a show called Wanted Justice on the History Channel that dealt with these cases as well. And of course, there's a show that I, was recently the executive producer of, called The Injustice Files, which actually ran from 2010 all the way to 2014. And so I've been on the, on the airwaves and, on television, fighting to get justice for these families. But I have to say that we have a long way to go. There's still about quite a few cases, I would say about 70 or 80 cases still on the list that we're still hoping to get some closure and justice done with. And so it's very important for the public to participate in the process of this.
You mentioned getting the public involved in the process. When you look at this from the standpoint of media, and you mentioned how important that was to Mrs. Mobley in terms of getting that public involvement. Talk a little bit about how important that is. And for us at the Post and the Tribune, obviously it's Black media that really broke this open. You talk about Johnson Publishing back in 1955 with Jet, and even to another seminal moment in the civil rights struggle when you talk about Central High School in Arkansas, where Black media was there first, and then other media got involved and about the turning the story upside down or corrupting it or whatever. Talk a little bit about that relationship in terms of media in general, but especially Black media and getting that word to inform and educate the public.
Yes, I would have to say, and I'm glad you mentioned this because I would be deeply remiss if I didn't mention the Black press. It was the writings and the journalism of many of these, we call them heroes without swords, right? That's what we call them. So it was Jimmy Hicks of the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper that I actually studied. I actually studied his works to get the case reopened. And so it had a profound effect and impact on the Emmett Till murder case. It was the Black press that I studied, their writings from 1955, all these articles. That's what I did. I went to Schomburg, I went to New York Public Library, and I grabbed all this microfiche from all these different Black newspapers because they covered the case exactly how it happened in 1955. They also named the names of the perpetrators who were involved. All I did was go back and review these names, wrote them down, and searched for these people to see if they were still alive. And many of them were still alive. So if not for the Black press and their preservation in this story, I honestly tell you, would not be reopened right now. We're still using articles and writings from members of the Black press on this case to actually solve it now. And so, again, I'm glad you mentioned that because they played a very significant role. We hear about Jet Magazine all the time, right? But we don't hear about those others, Simeon Booker, you have Moses Newsom, Jimmy Hicks, as I mentioned, Clottie Murdoch. You had a lot of people who attended the trial in 1955, and they experienced the Delta, firsthand. But they were also working behind the scenes, trying to find witnesses to bring forward. In fact, the first day of the trial in 1955 was recessed because it was said there were witnesses who could come and testify on the behalf of the prosecution. You had members of the Black press, the police departments and sheriff's departments at the time. This actually is called the first interracial manhunt that took place, that this moment is known as. And you had members of the Black press, NAACP officials, everyone got together and searched the Delta for eyewitnesses. They came back the following day with 4 eyewitnesses to the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till. And so again, the Black press has always played a very significant role throughout not only history, but even now. And it's just a shame, I have to say, that a lot of our great, newspapers are now becoming extinct, so played a very significant role. Johnson Publishing, John Johnson played a very significant role. David Jackson, who took the photograph of Emmett Till, played a very significant role. And it's because of Mother Mobley's courageousness to have that open casket funeral. She allowed the media, the Black media in particular, to come in and have the story first. And that is because, because of the Black media, because of Jet Magazine, I'm here.
I got a couple other questions coming from the audience, but let me ask you this before we get into those. When you were going to Mississippi researching this, what kind of pushback did you get from Mississippians about coming down there and investigating this case?
Well, it was interesting about that, Mr. Johnson. I really didn't have that much of an impact. Pushback. And the reason being is because nobody really knew I was in the Delta investigating the case. I kept that quiet because I knew if people found out what I was doing, it would stop quickly. I had a premature interview with the mayor of Ruleville, Mississippi at the time, Mayor Edwards. And during our interview, her significant other jumped in front of the cameras and stopped us from going any further because he felt that I was going to put the mayor's life in danger because the people who killed Emmett Till was still around there. And that raised a huge red flag for me. And at that moment, I realized how careful I needed to be. If you look at the untold story of Emmett Lewis Till, there's 2 people who are shot in silhouette. The reason being is because they were afraid that someone would find out who they are and come after them. So, my whole time in the Delta was very on the hush hush. And it was for not only my benefit, but of course, to protect the identities of those who were willing to participate and come forward. And so I think that was one of the smartest things I ever did was kept quiet about my being in the Delta and stuff. And it's funny because I'm thinking about it as you speak. I used to travel straight from Baker, Louisiana, which is in Baton Rouge, outskirts of Baton Rouge, 5 hours away to get to the Delta. And I would go and grab 2 or 3 interviews and I would drive myself back that same night because I didn't want anyone to see me going in and out of the Delta of Mississippi and grabbing interviews.
Double secret investigative work.
Really, it really was. And it's just interesting when I haven't thought about this in some time. And so Mr. Johnson asking that question, it just brought up all these whirl of emotions in me because there were many times that my father would travel with me, for instance, for a lot of these interviews. And it got to the point where I did not even feel comfortable with him being with me because I said, Lord, if something happened to him, I would never forgive myself. But if something happened to me, it's okay because this is something that I was willing to die to do. And so I asked him not to travel with me anymore. I would travel to the Delta back and forth all the time by myself.
Interesting. Michelle Sheehan asked this question. Great work. Will your documentary eventually become an ebook option for HBCUs and college courses online students in the future? It is for online students in the future.
Well, the fortunate thing about the untold story of Emmett Till, it's not a new film. It was out in 2005 and went to theaters in 2005, and then it went to television. So the film is, a lot of schools and institutions have the film in the library. It's just only now there's a huge resurgence of the story of Till, and people are discovering my film for the first time, but it's always been out there. The newest thing that is happening right now in my camp is the feature film that I've always wanted to produce is finally coming out on October 7th of this year. And so I've done my rounds around the country, around the world, teaching the story of Emmett Till. So you could just ask your local library or the school libraries, they probably already have a copy of the film. And there is a curriculum that's attached to the film because the Harvard Civil Rights Project built a curriculum around the film itself too. And if that's not available, I'll make sure it'll be available, on, of course, the Charlotte Post website for you to be able to have access to it.
We'll make sure that happens. Carolyn Winder asks, thank you for your bravery and for all you do. All in caps with exclamation point. She then says, I mentor for a youth program in the Triangle area called Leaders of Tomorrow. It's nationwide. Besides filmmakers, investigators, and news journalists, what career fields, she put news journalists in there. What career fields would you encourage young people to enter into that could help bring us closer to racial justice in America?
A good question. I'm biased in many ways. Being able to discover that I have talent to tell stories, but tell stories in a way that prompts change. I will fall back on filmmaking, but we do need people in the judicial system. I still wish that I would have continued my career and became a civil rights attorney. Although I have the best of both worlds now, I work with attorneys all the time and help them build cases. And I do it through my abilities of telling stories through filmmaking and so on. But, we need leadership in our community. We need people to hold public office. We need stuff as simple as people participating in the jury process. These are tangible things that young people could do right now and play active roles in. And, again, I can only encourage to continue to tell these stories. All of us, we're blessed. Many of us are blessed to have elders in our lives. And the way that we will be able to understand, to get around this racism that exists, we must talk to them. We must educate ourselves about the past. There's so many stories to tell. Many may not have to deal with civil rights, but there's stories to tell. We're in Black History Month or Black Future Month, everybody is saying, right? It is very important for us to understand that many of the tools that we seek are at our fingertips. It is not a difficult time like it was back in the 50s and 60s and the 80s and the 90s. We can become our own, journalists, have our own platform to share our own stories because of social media and technology. So I'll just want to encourage, everyone. Of course, there's the many different positions or many careers that can be taken. But what we're looking for now, we need some immediacy to educate, re-educate, and get ourselves in positions of power so we can see the change we've been longing for.
Excellent. Also, we have Beverly Foster. She writes, my heart hurts so much. Thank you all for the conversation. Thank you for the late Emmett Till Mobley for being an advocate. Just cannot understand how white folks do not understand or own up to the atrocities. We have never been so cruel, never. And they think we are cruel or animals. That's not a question, but that's a great point.
Yes.
So now you've got renewed interest in your documentary. You've got a movie that's coming out later on this year. Talk a little bit about the future. I mean, will you continue to do more filmmaking until the case is solved, or moving forward, or what do you do next, basically?
Well, our fight now is to make sure that justice is done. And for me, it was a promise that I gave Mother Mobley that I will continue on until everyone has passed on. Carolyn Bryant Dunham is still with us. Again, people look at her as a victim. Some of the discoveries along the way, I discovered there were 2 kids who were picked up and assaulted and kidnapped before Emmett Till was kidnapped. She was a participant in that. So there's overwhelming evidence, I feel strongly, could actually put her away. It is just important for us to find a courageous DA to take on that task. We haven't been able to find that person. But with pressure being placed on the state of Mississippi now, I hope that too could be possible. I never realized that getting the case reopened in 2004 could actually be possible. But after I did that impossible, I still have hope that something good could come out of this. But to answer your question, Mr. White, I have never stopped doing this work. Again, Till was my first film. That was like 16, 17 films ago. I've done all of my productions have been productions to help the community or to seek out justice for those who have been done wrong. And because of that, and because of this discovery, again, of using filmmaking as my activism tool, I will continue to do so. And so we have Till, the movie that's coming out. I have some other things that are coming in on the burner immediately after that I can't really talk about now, but I've been working with TV for a while, whether it's in front of the cameras or behind the cameras. But I have things in the works that I feel that's going to contribute and it's going to help our community.
Here are 2 points that coming up. We have Celeste Hart who asked, this is not a question, this is a great point. The case of Ronnie Long, North Carolina, who spent 44 years in prison for rape of a white woman, exonerated recently. The detective said they would not consider his innocence until the woman died, protecting the white woman.
Yeah, it's a shame. And I know Mr. Long. I had a couple of conversations with him when he was actually exonerated. It's just terrible we live in this world, and we've talked, Mr. White and Mr. Johnson, we talked about this, and it's a strange world that we live in when we continue to see the protection of white womanhood, and that's so frustrating to me, especially when you see that there's an injustice at play. And so the only thing I hope that I can have and the only thing that comes to mind is a quote that keeps me inspired on a daily. And it's a quote from Amiri Baraka. And he says, "There's no justice in America. It's the pursuit of justice that sustains you." And that's the most realist quote I've ever heard in my life, because we know that no matter what we do, whether we bring perpetrators forward to serve time, or whether, people are continuing to be protected, there's no way to bring the loved ones back and those lives and the time that's lost. But we do have to hold on to hope that we can make the world a better place. And so I have faith, in knowing that as individuals, we hold the power to continue to inspire and aspire for change, right? But I can't say that much about a judicial system and a system that was put together not for us. And so we're talking about transgenerational problems. And because these are transgenerational problems, it may take a generation or 2 to fix. So we have to pace ourselves. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it can happen.
It depends on how old you are. You can't pace yourself if you get to a certain age. You got to look.
I got you.
Marie Darcy asked this question. I want to thank, well, it's not a question either. I want to thank you for shedding light on the story of Emmett Till, for your bravery and your persistence in telling this story. These stories are so important. Please continue the good fight with your documentary filmmaking. And she didn't say this, but I'm putting this in here. You got a pipeline to keep this going as you grow older and get on down the road?
Well, you know, one of the greatest things that's happened, there's so many great things that's happened, you know, since the Till case was reopened. Not everyone has the opportunity to see the fruits of their labor in a sense. And I don't say it's all been me. You know, I had a team of people who have assisted me. I have a number of supporters who have been on my side over the years to keep me going. You know, the reopening of the Till case has, you know, caused the Emmett Till anti-lynching, not anti-lynching, but the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Act, which is, you know, was put into existence and into law to allocate funding to seek justice in a lot of these civil rights code cases. There's a fight, of course, to get the anti-lynching legislature passed. There's been, memorials all around the country named in Emmett Till's name. People are re-educating themselves about the story. There was just a mini series on television about the Emmett Till case. There's so many things that has happened and so many things that affect our lives that is going on because of Till. And so one of the great things that have come out of this as well is the Emmett Till archives at Florida State University. They're going to house the most Emmett Till, have the most Emmett Till archives in the world. And I've been donating all my work to Florida State so they can preserve that history so that young people or educators can continue to teach about Till or even go further than me, because I don't believe that the Till case is going to ever truly be solved. Yeah, we can identify all the perpetrators who were involved, but there's so much to the story that has yet to be told. And so, you know, I think by me donating my research and all the stuff that I gather on Till, it's just going to help a new generation. It's all about being a trailblazer. I'm only here for a certain time. It's important for me to lay the path and groundwork for someone else to follow behind me. And that's foremost in my mind at all times.
As we're getting close to closing out, and I want to get this in for you to get out in terms of a call to action. You've done all this work and have done a great job telling this story. From your perspective, what can we do to make sure that we can keep this alive, and not only just the Emmett Till story, but justice in general? How do we get involved to make this a better place to live?
Well, first, on the Emmett Till side of things, the public can help. There's a petition that the family has put out asking and garnering the support of those, the public to get involved. And I have it right here in front of me. We're asking everyone to text, and I'll send this over to you as well. We ask everyone to text the name Emmett, E-M-M-E-T-T, to this number here. Again, text the name Emmett, E-M-M-E-T-T, to the number 243-725. 243-725. So text the name Emmett to 243-725. And that's a petition that's been circulating for a period of time that we're asking everyone to sign. It's over 200,000 right now. People have signed it, so we ask everyone to sign it.
I'm gonna put it in the text in the chat. What's
yes.
Gerald, I'm typing it now.
You got it? Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Okay. And so to complete your question, or to complete my answer, I think it's just very it's very important for people to be vigilant and understand what's happening in their community. We have lost a lot of rights in the past few years. And it's very important that we hold on to those things that we benefited from. Because when we start seeing our civil rights being taken away over and over again, then we're going to find ourselves in a not so good place like we were in back in the 1930s, 40s, and even the 50s. It is scary that in my lifetime that I actually see history repeat itself. And it's happening now. The language that our former president was speaking, he was speaking the language of the Citizens Council. He was using fear-mongering to control the population of the people. He becomes president, and all this hate, not that it didn't exist before, but he took that scab off that hate. And of course, it's everywhere now. It's festering everywhere. So now what we do, we have to come together collectively. We need to put ourselves in positions of power. We need to hold those who are in power accountable for being in those positions. We need to get people who are going to be there for our rights. And that is very important. And for the young people, I would just want to encourage them, you have the ability, despite the atmosphere that we're in, you have the ability to cause change at your fingertips. I know when people are thinking about, being inspired by something, inspired to do something is a very difficult thing. I was that kid. I remember having that fire in my belly and did nothing. Just tucked it in and didn't worry about it. But then the first time I finally listened to that fire in my belly, this is what happened. So I just like to encourage everyone. Look, the struggle, we are strong people. We have gone through many trials and tribulations, and we're still here. But I want to make this country the better place, the promises that were supposed to be given to us, right? I want to make sure that this country lives up to those promises. And many of us do. But you have to be very, we have to have people in leadership roles to make things happen. I don't believe in following the leader anymore. Back then when we had Dr. King, that was a great thing to do because we had one enemy, we understood that enemy, we identified to that enemy. Now that enemy has changed on in too many different forms, from racial profiling and of course the continuous uneven scales of Lady Justice. Now as individuals, we have to hold ourselves accountable as well, and we have to be obligated to participate in this movement. Not everyone is made to be a part of the movement, but those of us who are brown-skinned and who are Black, I always say this, we're born into activism. That activism is already in you. You have no choice. You can't fight against it. You can choose to ignore it and not turn it on, but you do have the power to turn it on to cause change in your own way. It doesn't have to be in filmmaking. It could be in the other different careers that you choose. And so that's very important. And I don't want to be up here like I'm on a soapbox preaching, but we're in a dire need now to have a huge awakening once again in this country. We have all been longing for this new movement. We thought that when Black Lives Matter happened, we were going to see that movement. This is why the Emmett Till case is so important, because I truly believe that Mother Mobley had the blueprint to man's liberation as well when it comes to racial progression in this country. Because if we could arguably say that the civil rights movement was the greatest movement ever produced by citizens of this country, the most successful movement of any time, then you must look at the story of Emmett Till and understand what transpired in 1955. When we do that, I believe we will understand the path that must be taken. And this is why I continue to tell the story of Emmett Till time and time again.
We got several other comments that I'm gonna get to. I'm gonna bypass some of the comments, but 2 questions from people that haven't heard from. Bill Diskin asked, great question. What can we do to support you in your work?
Just continue to watch my work. That's all I ask. I'm on social media. Follow me. The biggest thing that's coming out next is the feature film on Till, produced by myself, Whoopi Goldberg, Fred Zolo, Barbara Broccoli. It's been directed by Chinoya Chiku. And so I'm very excited about this opportunity because we get to resurrect my dear mentor friend. And everyone will get another clear, I would say, I said another, but how should I say it? You will be able to see an even clearer picture of who Mamie Till Mobley is. And I say is because I believe she's still with us, because there's no way that I could have gone on this journey for so long and had so much success without her. And so I ask everyone just to support my work. Follow me on social media, support my work. If you hadn't seen the Injustice Files, you could go to Investigation Discovery Go. That's an app. You can see some of my shows there. Just support the work, and I have more things coming out, and I just ask for the support.
Excellent. And finally, we have Lamar Phipps, who just asked the question, what does this petition ask? The one that you put into text.
What's that now?
He asked, what does this petition ask? The one that you put up.
Well, the petition is asking that the last accomplice, who was Carolyn Bryant Dunham, be brought to justice. And it's urging the state of Mississippi to press forward in possible indictments. And so that's what this petition is about. So it's something that, is ongoing, has been ongoing for some time, but it's very important for us. We feel that it's very important that the public get involved.
Okay, that's basically all the time we have for tonight with all of this. I will turn it over in a minute to the hostess. And I want to thank you for your time and bringing to light more about the Emmett Till story and the great work that you were doing. I just want to thank you so much for doing this for Black History Month.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. If I may, I just want to leave everyone with this. One of our greatest scholars of all time was Dr. John Henry Clark. And he stated that no people are truly free until they become an instrument of their own liberation. Freedom is not to be bequeathed from one generation to the next. Each generation must take and maintain its freedom with its own hands. I truly believe that. It's up to us now.
Great. This has been recorded. Everybody on the call, as well as everyone that registered, will receive this recording, and we will post it on our website so anybody can come and see it. Again, this was great information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Got anything before we turn it over?
Thank you, Keith. That was excellent.
Thank
Great
you so
work.
much.
And if you have anything while I'm going over the closing remarks, if you have anything you want to put in the chat as far as how to reach you or any of your references, you can do that.
Thank you.
We have a couple of upcoming events before we close out. In case you are interested, next week, yes.
Okay.
Next week on Tuesday, February 22nd, we will have a home buying 101 with Town Bank, what you need to know before you buy. And then on Thursday, February 24th, after lockdown, is the life after incarceration, just another prison. And Friday, February 25th, we will have Meet the Press, the Charlotte Post Press. And if you would like to attend any of these events, you can register online. You can go to either the charlottepost.com or the triangletribune.com. And all of the events are listed and you will be able to register. And we hope you enjoyed and we see you at the next event. And Mr. Beauchamp, we are proud of you
Thank you.
and much success to you.
Thank you.
And our contact information is on the screen now. If you want to call us for advertising or donations, podcasts, newsletters, subscriptions, sponsorships, we are here for you.
And I'd like to say, on behalf of the Charlotte Post Publishing Company, publisher of the Charlotte Post and the Triangle Tribune newspaper, we'd like to thank you for attending our webinar this evening, and we look forward to seeing you in the future ones. Thank you and good night.